What's up everybody, Nate here. And over time, the United States has seen its fair share of individuals who have amassed extreme wealth. From Andrew Carnegie to the Rockefellers to today, we have Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. There have been billionaires and extremely wealthy individuals pretty much all throughout American history. And while there have been billionaires and extremely wealthy individuals throughout our nation's history, there has also been some major pushback against those billionaires. You can see throughout history the major pushback from most of our society against these billionaires. These billionaires control too much of our politics and too much of our government. These individuals make way too much money while the rest of us don't make nearly enough. And the same narrative is starting to play out today. We have Congress people and we also have organizations that are dedicated to not only taxing billionaires, but getting rid of the idea of having billionaires in the first place. So that got me thinking, are billionaires really this evil that needs to be wiped out of our society altogether, or are billionaires actually really good for our economy? And today I want to discuss the billionaire problem in the United States. And I just want to be clear here, I have no stake in this argument. I do not care if the United States or any other country in the world has billionaires, because let's be honest, I am never going to become a billionaire myself. So it doesn't matter to me whether we have billionaires or we completely get rid of them. So today I want to just look at the unbiased approach of all of the information and talk about the facts of our economy and how billionaires affect it. So the three major arguments against billionaires that I'm going to be discussing in detail today are: 1, billionaires are way too rich. Number 2, billionaires exploit our economy and more importantly exploit workers. And number 3, billionaires have way too much influence in our politics and are not taxed nearly enough. So if we talk about the idea of billionaires being way too rich, well, what people are saying here is that billionaires have way too much money compared to everybody else. I mean, if you look at the top 1% of earners and billionaires in the United States and just across the entire world, they make sometimes hundreds, if not tens of thousands more than the average worker in our economy. Billionaires then use this money to do whatever they want, whether it's buying a super mega yacht like Jeff Bezos, or it's buying a whole company like Elon Musk and how he bought Twitter. I think the big argument here is that when you have individuals who are making so much, you can't exactly have a fair economy with somebody making so much less. And I think what people ultimately get wrong with this argument when they talk about billionaires being way too rich is that you have billionaires having so much money and they take up a certain portion of our economy. They have all of the money, meanwhile the rest of us don't have any money. But that's not exactly how our monetary system works. Billionaires do have a ton of money and they do hold a massive chunk of all of the overall wealth in our economy, but just because billionaires have a ton of money, that doesn't necessarily take away from the earning potential of anybody else in the United States. The reason being is because there is always so much money out there and there is always so much money being created. For instance, at the start of 2020, we had around $3 trillion in circulation. So all of these billionaires and the bottom 99% shared all of that money. But today we have over $20 trillion. So now, of course, billionaires got a whole lot richer through the pandemic and through recessions and all of the different things that happened over the last couple of years. So now there are a whole lot more dollars out there because of things like inflation, and that means there's more opportunities for the average person to get a lot more money. And of course, every single year, the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department are printing more money, and of course that means inflation goes up, but it also means that you have to earn more. Billionaires understand this, and that's why they have most of their wealth held up in assets that are going to continue to gain value over time. Meanwhile, the middle class doesn't have as many assets, and most of their money is tied up in things that are going to lose value over time. So there's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of opportunity to start a business. There's a lot of opportunity for you to own assets and to invest, but you have to be financially educated and you have to know how to handle your money. And this is nobody's fault, because over time, generations are not taught correctly about money and they handle money very differently. Like my generation of millennials, when we were taught to save, we were taught to work very, very hard, but that does not necessarily translate to financial success, even though that is pretty much everything that we were taught. And it It's no fault of our parents because that's what they were taught. But our economy is very much different than what our grandparents went through 30, 40, and 50 years ago. Working hard and the idea of making all of your money and retiring from a job just is not what many people are going to experience today. So we have to kind of look at the new economy, and if you want to have financial success in this economy, you have to do different things. With that being said, billionaires are extremely rich, but that also means that billionaires actually took on huge amounts of investment in order to get that rich. So many billionaires, whether they inherited their wealth or whether they started big businesses, had to create something in order to stay wealthy and get all of that money. So their investments over time have contributed positively to the economy. Obviously, you can sit here and go back and forth and say, well, there's a lot of things that billionaires spend their money on that do not necessarily contribute to the economy, and that is absolutely true. One way to kind of look at this situation, though, is even though a billionaire like Jeff Bezos goes out and buys a huge mega yacht, well, now that he's bought that yacht, he doesn't take care of that yacht himself. He actually employs hundreds, if not thousands of people to drive the boat, to cook food on the boat, to clean the boat, to do everything in between, because Jeff Bezos doesn't have the skills or the time to do all of that. That means this billionaire is actually employing people by spending hundreds of millions of dollars on a yacht. And granted, billionaires do spend their money on things that don't employ people, and billionaires waste a lot of money through greedy purchases like buying big houses and fancy cars. I'm not going to sit here and say that every single billionaire is perfect and every single billionaire deserves credit because they invest back into the economy. No, billionaires waste a ton of money too, but we have to kind of look at, well, do they contribute more to the economy or do they take away from the economy? And I think the overall idea here when we talk about billionaires being way too rich is it has nothing to do with the money themselves. Like, think of the argument. It's the way that billionaires spend money. So it's not the billionaire status that we're talking about here. It's not the money itself, it's the person. Money is just a tool to get the things that we want out of life. And if you have a really good person, if you have a really giving person, well, giving them money is just going to allow them to amplify their community and give back even more. But if you have a really bad person and you give them $1 billion, well, they're going to continue to be bad with that money. So billionaires are extremely rich, but there is a reason for that in our economy. Now, let's talk about number two. Billionaires not only exploit workers, but they also exploit capitalism and our economy. The whole idea here is that billionaires don't actually make anything, so they're not entitled to any of the wealth that regular Americans actually produce. Somebody sitting in a factory somewhere, somebody boxing up packages, Amazon, well, they're not being compensated nearly enough considering billionaires who actually run the company don't actually create the things that the company sells. So that is the whole idea here, but I want to have a little bit of a pushback on that because there is some irregularities with that whole thought process, and it comes down to, well, nobody technically gets that rich on their own. For instance, if you were to buy a car and you became a delivery driver for your own business, well, that means you're now creating goods and you're transporting them on that car. But technically, if you really think about it, you got rich because you had a vehicle that you could transport goods and services from, but you didn't actually build the car. So should you have a lot of your wealth taken away because you didn't build the car? Look, I think that there are some CEOs out there and some billionaires who are grossly overcompensated, and they definitely do not treat their workers correctly, and that is a serious systemic problem in our economy. I think that billionaires could be giving a whole lot more to their workforce, and it's honestly gross to see some of the conditions and some of the things that workers have to go through in order to get a paycheck. But at the end of the day, I'm not convinced that billionaires and CEOs who are also billionaires don't contribute anything to that company. I mean, there's a reason there is an executive of that company. There is somebody who is a leader, somebody who constructs the entire company to run successfully. That person is extremely valuable and they should be compensated for that. Workers are extremely valuable too, and they should be compensated for that. And what I always say here is there are a ton of bad businesses out there. There are a ton of businesses that are not going to compensate you correctly for your hard work. But the beauty of our economy is, well, just don't work for that business. There are a ton of different options out there. There are a ton of entry-level positions out there that can pay you a whole lot more, and people should never be satisfied. If you feel like you're not being compensated enough, well, take your business elsewhere. Take your skills somewhere else where you could be compensated a whole lot more and make a lot more money. The other thing that I want to point out here is that that when we talk about exploitation, well, this is a very, very vague idea, and it's very, very complicated. Like I said, I firmly believe that there is some level of exploitation that goes on with our workers just in general, with the value that they produce at some companies and the amount of pay they receive in return. And don't get me wrong here, I'm not making excuses for billionaires and CEOs, but Americans have it really good when we talk about the laws and our working conditions here in the United States, pretty much across the board. It's a complicated issue, but when we talk about Americans in general, even the lowest earning Americans in our country, they are still making leaps and bounds more than other people across the world. There are some people that are making a whole lot less in a lot of other economies with even worse working conditions, and in a lot of those countries, those are actually considered good working conditions. Now again, I'm not making excuses for these billionaires to say, well, they can exploit workers in other countries because that's the standard over there. They should provide a good standard of working conditions no matter the place across the world. All I'm saying here is that when we talk about exploitation, it's a cultural thing, and it's very difficult to kind of quantify because everybody comes from a different social understanding, and you're never going to have somebody agree whether it's exploitation or actually whether it's really, really good working conditions. Just for me, I used to work in a kitchen for about 5 or 6 years, and every single summer the AC would break and it was 100+ degrees in that kitchen, but I stayed at that job and I made money and I just kind of powered through it. And of course in the winter the heat was broken, so then it was freezing cold, and a lot of people would consider that exploitation and really, really poor working conditions, and it definitely was. But looking back, for me personally, it really wasn't that bad. Some people have it a whole lot worse, like construction workers working 12-hour days in the hot summer heat. That is serious, but is that exploitation, or is that just something that has to be done? So my point is, I'm not necessarily saying that billionaires aren't exploiting workers, but I think to the extent that we talk about in 2023 of whether or not it's happening in our economy, I think it is a little bit dramatized, and I don't think it's happening as widely as a lot of people are saying it is. And then number 3, and the final thing I want to discuss, is billionaires and their influence on politics, and of course the amount of taxes that they actually pay. So it is no secret that billionaires have lobbyists, and same with billion-dollar corporations. They have people that literally go to Washington and try to convince policymakers to vote in their favor. Not only that, but you have somebody like Warren Buffett, who is one of the richest people in the United States and across the world, admitting that he actually pays less taxes than his secretary. A lot of people are going to hear that kind of stuff and they're going to get enraged because they see somebody who is a billionaire essentially not paying their fair share. And not only that, they are manipulating our system. They are using their money and their influence and their power to do whatever they want whenever they want to. But I think this isn't an issue necessarily with billionaires themselves. Like, yes, it is definitely an issue that billionaires use their power and influence to get a hold of Congress members and make them do whatever they want. That is definitely a problem. But what is a bigger problem is that Congress does nothing about it and actually accepts these bribes. That to me is a much bigger situation than just a billionaire having a whole bunch of money. We have corruption at pretty much every level in the private sector and of course from our government, and that is a serious issue that goes beyond money. We could create laws and we could create systems to actually block billionaires and lobbyists in our economy and in our government, but we do nothing about it. And then when billionaires try to game the system and do what they want to do, well, of course they're able to, because Congress does nothing, because Congress themselves are pretty wealthy. So I think that needs to be more of a focus here. We need to focus on the politicians. We need to focus on Congress not doing something when billionaires try to bribe them. We need to create a system and a system of laws that cannot allow that to happen, because billionaires just having money and doing what they want, well, that is one thing. But then if they're using that money to manipulate our system, well, that is a serious problem. Congress should be doing something about it because it is serious. And it's actually more serious than you really think, because when we talk about members of our government, well, they have a lot of power and influence too, but once they're elected, they can pretty much do whatever they want until it's time for re-election. So that might be 2 years, 6 years, 4 years, it really just depends, but they have pretty much unprecedented control once they're in office. Once you vote for them, they don't necessarily have to stick to the things that they said they were going to do when they were running. But billionaires have a little bit of a different problem here when it comes to power and influence, because if people don't like what a billion-dollar corporation is doing, say Walmart or McDonald's, they can boycott those locations, and they vote with their dollars. It essentially creates a situation where a lot of these big corporations like Walmart do not have as much power, because if they make decisions that people don't like, well, then people can essentially not purchase from those stores. I think the big issue with this right now, though, is that there is a lot of locations like Walmart and Target and a lot of these other places that have basically kicked out mom and pop shops. Like, you're not going to be able to shop anywhere else if you boycott Walmart because there isn't any other stores around. But this is a luxury that I think the middle class and the upper middle class has in the United States, because if you have ever gone to those mom and pop shops where they sell basically the same amount of things, well, the prices at those stores are a whole lot higher versus Walmart, which is designed to keep prices as low as possible. So if you were to take away these establishments and take away that innovation, now people are only left with these mom and pop shops, and that hurts the lower class Americans the most, because now they have to pay more of their income for all of the same things. And obviously when we talk about billionaires, well, billionaires in general do not pay that many taxes, and that just has to go within our tax code, because our tax code actually incentivizes investments and business owners, because these are the things that grow our economy the fastest. That is exactly why Warren Buffett actually can pay less taxes than his secretary, because his secretary has an income tax, which is one of the highest tax things in our economy, versus Warren Buffett. He uses a lot of money from debt and loans, or he sells investments, which are taxed very low. But like I said, the benefits that a lot of those investments have, well, we want billionaires to continue to invest, not just in innovation, in creating businesses and other things that create a lot better of a society for every single American, but we want them to continue to pour their wealth into things like the stock market, because that helps regular people that have investments too. They drive up the price of these stocks, and that drives up 401ks, that drives up individual investment accounts, and that helps everyday Americans to get a lot richer too, so they see the benefits of that as well. Now, President Joe Biden and a lot of other members of Congress want to tax billionaires more. They want to have a minimum tax level of almost 50% for a lot of these billionaires and the income that they bring in. What you have to consider here is what exactly Congress and our government does with tax dollars in general, because there is no guarantee that just because they tax billionaires more, that money isn't going to be wasted on Congress and some other crazy thing that the current administration wants to pay for. Like I said, you have no control over how Congress uses your tax dollars. Once those politicians are elected, they pretty much have free reign during their term. So they can do more military funding, or they can fund Social Security, or they can fund education. Anything and everything that they want, they can fund, and they're using billionaires' tax dollars to do that. And you might not necessarily agree with those spending patterns. Versus with billionaires, well, like I said before, you vote with your dollars. So if people don't like what billionaires are doing, well, that means that they're taking money away from these corporations. They're taking money away from billionaires. So billionaires have a lot more incentive to make a quick change, because they're losing a ton of money. Versus government, well, the government is a currency creator. So even if they don't get enough tax dollars within their system, well, they just decide to print more, which is exactly why we have inflation every single year. So at the end of the day here, I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing to say, well, we're going to tax billionaires more, and that's going to help our economy, and that's going to help our society, because we don't know what the government is going to do with those tax dollars. They could completely waste it. The whole idea here is, should we be limiting the amount of money that people can make in our economy? And if we do, where exactly does that stop? How do we limit corporations? How do we limit other businesses? And how far is that going to trickle down for our entire economy? Is it going to affect jobs? Is it going to affect taxes? And is it actually going to help our entire system? What do you think about billionaires in our economy? Do you think that billionaires are evil and you want to get rid of them as soon as possible? Or do you think there is a certain benefit to having billionaires in our economy, and we should continue to make the system better so that we can have more and more billionaires in our country? I'm very interested to see what you think, so leave your thoughts in the comments below. That is it for me, everybody. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.